Howdy folks, 42% Health here. Welcome to what is probably my cringiest video because it's literally just my face talking to a camera. This video is going to be a lot more personal than anything else I've put out so far, so I figured the camera was appropriate. But if it's too cringy, just minimize the tab, I won't be offended. A while back, I said something along the lines of, I am not emotionally ready at this time to talk about my story with my family, but maybe someday. Well, today is that day. I am sharing my story. I'm going to start by saying my mom was physically and emotionally abused as a child. So, although the rest of this video could be construed as a hit piece against my mom, I don't really mean it that way. I have sympathy for her. I suspect she's a narcissist. I suspect that's a result of her abuse, but uh, I don't possess the qualifications to diagnose her for one. And for another, I do have sympathy for her. The way she raised us isn't really excusable, but I don't want someone to consume the rest of this video without understanding that I don't harbor ill will against my mom. Okay, so up until second grade, I had a relatively normal family life. Starting in third grade, my mom decided she didn't like the public school system for a variety of reasons and pulled me out, started homeschooling me. It didn't take long before I was achieving excellent academic performance, and my parents took this as a sign that homeschooling was obviously the superior way to educate kids. I don't know how it is in the rest of the world, but in most of the United States, students, even homeschool students, are required to take standardized tests that compare them with other students of their grade level. And after a few years, I was achieving very high scores. By high school, I was pretty much getting 99 percentile in every subject. So, homeschooling is obviously the superior way of educating kids. Very shortly after we started homeschooling, though, my parents converted to what I'm going to call evangelicalism. They'd always been Christian in the sense that my dad was raised Catholic, my mom was raised a mix of Catholic and Lutheran. They always believed in God and had respect for church and stuff, although they didn't really go regularly. But they were religion wasn't a big part of their lives, but they were believers. Starting from third grade, or I think maybe the summer before I started third grade, they started attending this uh, conservative evangelical church, and yeah, religion became a much bigger part of our lives from that point onward. My mom started studying the Bible regularly. She made us read the Bible regularly. Unlike most Christian parents, the worst parts of the Bible were not hidden from us, even as young children. My mom literally read through all the ugliest passages with us in Bible study and tried to derive lessons from them. We were allowed to read the entire Bible ourselves. We didn't. She did never give us uh, the cute little cartoon kids Bibles with the stains cleaned up for kids. No. My first Bible was a King James Bible. Um, there was a strong emphasis on the fifth commandment: honor your father and mother. That was kind of cardinal rule number one in our house. Was no, there was no disrespecting of mom and dad, and they defined that rather broadly. It was anything that could be conceived as disrespectful, talking back, standing up to them at all was pretty severely punished. My mom embraced the judgmental Old Testament God. If you don't know anything about the Bible, good for you. Okay, if you know anything about the Bible, you probably know what that means. If you don't, it's it's basically, the Bible's divided into two parts. The Old Testament was written before the time of Jesus, and the New Testament was written after. The Old Testament God is a very barbaric war god who demands blood sacrifices. He punishes the slightest of offenses with death in some pretty brutal ways. And the New Testament God got his act together a little bit better. That most of the flowery Bible verses that you see on greeting cards come from the New Testament, because that version of God is usually more palatable to modern sensitivities. So, but my mom liked the Old Testament God for whatever reason. She saw herself as a middleman between God and her kids, and if she failed to train obedience into us, she would have to answer to God for that. She was responsible for instilling all of her beliefs into us. Now, when I say train, I mostly mean punish. Punishment is the only language that my mom seems to know. As a couple of examples, she liked it when we were out in public and us kids would receive compliments from perfect strangers about our behavior, mostly because she had trained us to be quiet and sit still and be polite and, stuff like that. But she was talking to some other homeschool parents, and they told her that when when their kids are complimented in that way, uh, they have an extra dessert night as a reward. Well, my parents basically said, "Oh, that sounds like a great idea." Now, of course, they were joking. They said, "That sounds like a great idea," and they turned to us and said, "Okay, kids, whenever you get a compliment out in public, you won't get spanked when you get home." Uh, I hated that joke. It was it was a little too close to home. Like, this was literally how we lived our lives, was in fear of getting punished for something that you probably didn't even intend to do or didn't know was wrong. I couldn't help whether somebody was going to compliment me. All I could do was be on my best behavior, and if nobody gets a compliment, then we get punished anyway. Like, it doesn't. I don't know. It just hit a little too close to home. The other example is pizza parties. We're gonna have to give a little context here. So we would have family nights, 2 to 3 nights a week. My mom is a great cook, and she always made something nice for dinner, especially on family nights. So family nights were the nights where we would sit as a family and either watch a movie or play a game together. Well, at some point they decided that they wanted to incentivize us to keep our grades at a certain level. I think you had to get better than C. So I think you had to have a B or better average in all of your grades for a month. And then anyone who did that would get to be part of the pizza party. They characterized it as a reward. They wanted to reward good grades without punishing anyone else. However, if you didn't get good enough grades, you could not participate in the pizza party. You had to play in your room by yourself, and you got a peanut butter sandwich for dinner. So there's sort of this shame and ostracism attached to it. It's like being grounded, even though you're not, like, literally imprisoned in your room. Like, but what else are you gonna do? You can't be with the family. Like, so there's shame, there's ostracism. There's also the fact that you are getting kind of a lousy dinner. Like, on any other night, you would be getting whatever mom cooked for dinner, but no, on if you miss out on the pizza party, you get a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and you go play by yourself. So it very much felt like a punishment if you didn't get to be a part of it. Interestingly, after probably like a semester, uh, we determined that missing out on the pizza party was a big deal, and we tried really hard to get our grades up, which we did. Basically, we got to the point where nobody ever missed the pizza party, and after several months of that, the pizza parties just stopped. It's almost like there was no more point in doing the pizza party if nobody was missing out on it. So yeah, they just kind of stopped rewarding the good behavior because it was fairly obviously just a punishment in disguise. Another thing about my mom, she claims to have a gift of prophecy. I keep looking down here because, yeah, I have like an outline of a script written and I'm reading from it. She claims that she can hear God speak to her from time to time. Effectively, then, everything that she says is right because she's more in tune with God than anyone else in the family. It was actually very common if you had a disagreement with mom about something, she would say, "Okay, well, you pray about it and I'll pray about it. If God's speaking to both of us, we'll both get the same answer. If we get two different answers, then God's not speaking to both of us." The hidden message in there is, you better agree with me at the end of this exercise, or else uh, you're not hearing from God. Like, she didn't say that, and she would probably take issue with me phrasing it that way, but that was the effect. I don't know if I ever actually disagreed with mom in one of these instances. I think I just went with it because what are you going to do? Like, tell the prophets that they're not hearing from God? If I did sometimes confront her on prophecies that failed, mostly in those that last year and a half that I was living with them, and she would always fall back on the old, "Oh, that wasn't a prophecy, that was just me talking." So, yeah, there was really no way to win with mom. Another aspect of our life growing up was purity culture. Now, if you don't know what purity culture is, just thank your lucky stars. Um, Effectively, it's the idea that you need to save your virginity until marriage. But there's a lot more around it than that. For one thing, dating is replaced with courting. In a courtship, usually the parents are heavily involved. There's almost always a chaperone. Um, they have to the people who are courting have to get their parents' permission to do literally anything. Usually, kissing is forbidden. Hugging is either forbidden or strictly regulated. Sometimes hand holding is forbidden or regulated. Also, in purity culture, or at least in our instance, masturbation and pornography were loosely defined but strictly forbidden. And when I say loosely defined, I mean that this is pornography, this is pornography, and this is pornography. Our mom and dad would watch movies. We only had a small handful of movies we were allowed to watch growing up. Usually, mom and dad would watch them first to make sure that they were clean. And movies could be disqualified for very minor things like vague sexual references or something. If rock music is featured in the movie, then it would probably be disqualified. So yeah, growing up, I watched probably a couple dozen movies a bazillion times. So, and there's tons and tons of movies that like everyone has seen that I've not seen. I'm out of the loop on some of the culture of my generation. Another aspect of purity culture was that there was no respect for the kids' boundaries. Um, we were monitored at all times to make sure that we weren't doing anything forbidden. I remember being in my 20s and finding my mom searching my room just to make sure I didn't have any contraband hidden in there. Now, usually in purity culture, interactions with the opposite sex are strictly regulated and monitored. But that wasn't the case for us because, segue into my next point, we were completely isolated. Like I said, we were homeschooled starting in when I was in third grade, and then when I was, I think, freshman in high school, we were also pulled out of church. So we literally then had no friends our age. We had very few family friends, and those were all adults. They were literally just my parents' friends. Um, And even then, we didn't get to see them very often. Like they would come over for dinner or something once in a long while, and it was the event of the year. Like, oh, somebody's coming over for dinner. We finally get to talk to somebody who's not us. We had no exposure to outside ideas unless they were filtered through mom and dad. I recall my mom giving us very twisted versions of what things like uh, feminism was, for instance, or atheism or communism. They gave us the very radical right wing evangelical brainwashed version of all of these issues, and so I ended up growing up thinking that I understood these things and actually knowing nothing at all. One result of this isolation was that we became very radical over time. There was no check on our ideas, even from other Christians. We could sit down and read the Bible as a family. We would try to draw a lesson from some passage, and like whatever we came up with, that was the truth. You know, if we all agreed that it could mean that, then, or if most of us agreed, then that just kind of became what our family believed. And yeah, over time we became quite radical. We started listening to very radical preachers. Um, we were pulled out of church, but we didn't. We started churching at home, and we would listen to recorded sermons. Um, One of the pastors that we listened to was Chuck Baldwin. If you don't know who he is, don't bother listening to him. He's very radical, very conspiracy theorist, borderline Nazi. Like, he's really out there. And this is who my family would listen to from week to week. So we became very politically conservative slash libertarian. Um, I'm sure you've got some stereotypes in your mind. When I say that, they're probably mostly true. But we didn't, I don't think we fit all the stereotypes. We did start collecting guns. We were certain that there was going to be some kind of falling out with our government and that social infrastructure was going to collapse. We became preppers, basically people who want to be able to survive um, whatever they imagine the end of the world as we know it scenario to be. We started collecting up lots of imperishable food, lots of ammo. We started farming, and once we started farming, we basically had no free time anymore. We had to cut out some family nights. By the time we got the farm, I was a senior in high school. I was working part-time job, doing school, and then trying to raise beef cattle and help with all the other farm animals. I literally had no time left. Now, a note about myself. At this point in my life, I became insufferable. By the time I started working outside the home, I was convinced that I was God's gift to mankind. I was the best person around. I was super intelligent. I was super Christian. I was super educated in the ways of the Bible. I was pure. I was super handsome. You are all super lucky to know me. And the best thing you can do for yourselves is listen to my advice because I've got it all figured out. Now, I took 2 years off after high school to work at a cheese factory. My parents allowed me to live at home rent free while I did this. So I saved basically every penny. So I was very privileged to be able to complete college without having to take out any loans. That is one thing I've never had to contend with. Originally, my parents wanted me to go to a Christian college, but once we started comparing prices, we realized that the local public university was like a tenth of the cost of any private university. And I wasn't going to be able to go to a Christian college without taking out a crippling loan. So, reluctantly, my parents allowed me to go to the public university on some conditions. For one thing, I had to live at home. For another thing, absolutely no parties. Friends were even kind of discouraged. I did end up making a couple friends, but I wasn't able to spend a lot of time with my friends. Any breaks over an hour long, I had to come home. And yeah, they didn't want me staying after school unless I got permission and told them what I was going to be doing and how long I would be and all that stuff. Like I said, I made a couple of friends. One of them shared my interest in antique firearms. I still have kind of a nice, what I would call a nice collection of antique firearms. I would occasionally go to the local gun range with him if we had breaks between classes. One of my friends was an attractive young lady. My parents really didn't like the idea of me being friends with a girl, obviously, because purity culture. They closely monitored our correspondence. I had to set up auto forwarding on my school email and my personal email so they could see every email I sent and received, and anything from her they would automatically read. I wasn't allowed to hang out with her outside of class. One of my friends was actually a professor. Now, I took a class with this professor, and then about a year later, he mentioned to me that he was going to be hiring a research assistant for the summer. And I looked over the job and thought I was qualified, so I applied and got it. So I was able to work for him for a summer. And then I was also this uber nerd who would study math outside of the classes I was taking. Like, just out of curiosity, I studied like number theory and some other things. Abstract algebra was cool. Um, but anyway, so yeah, sometimes after class I would just like hang out in his office and talk to him about stuff I was learning or ask him questions. Um, but yeah, it wasn't until after all of this I found out he was gay. This was a very significant moment for me because it was the first time I had met a gay person who I could not characterize as a monster. He did not fit into the mold that my parents told me the gay people were. Um, After this revelation, my parents wanted me to stop contact with him, and they also asked these really cringe questions like, was he always respectful to you? Did he keep the office door shut when you were with him? And did he, like, I don't know, just stuff like this. Like, the kinds of purity culture questions they would ask if I had been with a girl. Um, Now, obviously, he wasn't like that. Like, it took me years to find out he was gay. Like, that was one of the things that started to shake my worldview at the time was just that, okay, no, gay people are not necessarily like that. It was also while I was in college that I got into gaming. Now, I had always been interested in video games. Um, One of my favorite games actually growing up was Hexen, which I had played when I was like 5 years old. Um, and of course, after my parents became crazy religious, they didn't like us playing games with magic or monsters in them. But I did play like Descent growing up. I played the first Age of Empires. I think I played a bit of Civilization. But there was always like it was like movies. There was this very small handful of approved games we could play, so we played them over and over. Half the time I didn't even know that we were only playing the demo version of the game, so it's not like I actually completed Descent. I only got like the first 7 levels. So while I was in college, I asked my dad if I could download Hexen for nostalgia, and he Googled it and clicked on the Wikipedia link, and right at the top of the page it says that Hexen is the German word for witches or to cast a hex. No further information was needed. He knew right away that that was not something we wanted in our house. So at this point, I think my worldview was separating from my parents a little bit, and I didn't think there was really any way that you could actually get demon possessed by downloading a game over the internet. Like, I didn't think that demons were downloadable. So I went ahead and put it on my school laptop. Sounds funny now, but I remember hiding it in a folder labeled school stuff or something like that. Like, I made this hidden folder in my laptop so that I could put Hexen on it and play it. And just like I was used to doing, I completed the game several times with all the classes. That's how I know enough about the game to make a walkthrough of it for YouTube. Um, I also got my gun range friend to play it with me between classes and stuff. We would play Hexen, and then after I got bored with Hexen, we played Doom. Oddly enough, I didn't actually like Doom the first time I played it. I just played through Doom 1 and I thought it was just kind of samey, like mazes and shoot and doors and shoot and I don't know. Compared to Hex and Doom didn't feel like it offered very much. I was still insufferable. I honestly don't know why my friends hung out with me. Looking back, I can think of times that I talked down to them. I treated them like they were lucky to be with me, like I was above them. The young lady that I mentioned expressed interest in dating me, and I shut her down very rudely, just because I thought, she wasn't good enough for me. After college, I installed Doom on my work PC and would play over my lunch break. It was actually during this time that I discovered custom WADs. The first one I played was Scythe. And of course, in downloading Scythe, I discovered like Alien Vendetta and found out there was like a million lifetimes worth of WADs that I could play, and they were all better than the original Doom. Like they were actually fun to play. So that's when I became active on Doom World. That was my only social media outlet, really. I didn't have any other. I mean, I would comment on YouTube videos I liked or whatever, but um, yeah, as far as like actually meeting people, that was pretty much exclusively on Doom World. Um, so through Doom World, I started becoming exposed to other viewpoints, and I was for the first time hearing leftists and atheists and feminists giving their opinions unfiltered through my parents. And yeah, when they speak for themselves, it's amazing, but they make a lot more sense, and they aren't actually stupid or evil. Like, it didn't take me very long to realize that all of these views had been misrepresented to me. So yeah, while I was working my first job, getting into Doom World, I started questioning some of the policies of my parents regarding personal freedom. My family was very pro freedom in politics. Like, they were the very stereotypical no government telling me what to do, and all about personal freedom, and the fact that they should be able to do anything they wanted with their land and do anything they wanted with their kids. And at the same time, I was getting burned out by working all day at work and then coming home and working all night at the farm. I was trying to actually learn the piano at the time. I've kind of given up on that. I should take it up again. But I was like trying to learn the piano. I was trying to learn to sing. I was interested in music. I was getting burned out. I was working all day at work, and then I would come home and I would have to do farm work. Uh, and then there was sometimes like 30 minutes before bed that I could do something on my own, like study math, practice the piano. So I started making attempts at this time to convince my parents to downsize the farm. The trouble was we had a few beef cattle, one dairy cow, a few sheep, a few goats, a few pigs, a handful of chickens, a few turkeys, um, and a ginormous garden. And the problem with that was that for whatever reason you couldn't let the dairy cow in with the beef cattle because um, we wanted the dairy cow to be the beef were basically wild cattle and they ran around and did whatever they wanted, and the dairy we wanted her to be docile so that we could milk her. So we couldn't have them together. So the dairy would cow would go out in one pasture and the beef would go in another pasture. Then you couldn't let the sheep and goats mingle for whatever reason. I don't even remember anymore. We had a male goat for breeding purposes, and he had to go in a separate pen. So we had to like divide our whole pasture up into these little pens, and we had to make sure that we could run water to all of them. And then in the winter, the water would freeze, so you had to run electrical cables everywhere to heat the water. And yeah, in order to separate all these pens, you have to run electric fence between them, and now there's like miles upon miles upon miles more electric fence than the charger is supposed to be able to handle. So we get a second charger and split the electric fence in two, and then like a bug lands on the fence and gets fried, and now it's shorting out the fence, and you have to go walk all that fence to find out where it's shorted out, and it was like there's always something to do. And I was starting to recognize that it was because we had so many different kinds of animals. So I was trying to get my siblings on board and my parents on board with, how about we downsize the farm, we simplify, we just get one or two kinds of animals, and then we'll all have less work to do. Um, it took me a surprisingly long time to figure out that nobody else actually wanted to do that. I think they were interested because I was talking like, let's make this easier on ourselves. And then when they figured out that they were gonna have to make it easier by giving up stuff, they were like, not really interested. But I don't know why it took me so long to figure out. I don't think there was some sort of miscommunication, and so it took me like over a year to realize that I was the only one who wanted less work on the farm. Like I would try to earn myself a little extra free time in the evening, and if I managed to find some way of like, oh, if I do this, then I don't have to water the cattle twice a day. I can just do it once in the morning, and I'll have a little bit extra free time in the evening. Or if I, do things in this order, I can save about 10 minutes outside and get myself a little extra free time in the evening. It wouldn't take very long for my parents to figure out a way to fill that in. They'd be like, oh, you're getting done early. How about we give you this responsibility now, too? Um, it was very frustrating. I eventually figured out that it was because of the whole idle hands are the devil's plaything issue. Like, they very much believed that free time wasn't a good thing. You know, if someone's got free time, then we're not keeping them busy enough and we're failing as parents. I was wanting freedom and I wasn't getting it no matter how hard I worked for it. I also started recognizing some other ways that they were using to control me. Uh, for instance, I at one point realized this was early on. I was 50% invested with them in the cattle. The agreement that we had made was um, all the expenses for raising the cattle would be split between me and my parents 50-50. This was a way of them helping me to save for college, was it, and then all the all the revenues that we made would also be split 50-50, with the caveat that they would get one cow or one head per year for our own family meat. Our land could support 3 to 4 a year, but due to accidents or whatever, um, sickness, whatever, sometimes a cow just would not. They would have like a miscarriage or something. We never got that. It was usually like 2 a year, maybe 3 if we were lucky. Because we were new to this farming thing. I'm sure other farmers probably have better luck, but maybe not because they also just have bigger herds. So if you lose one, it's not a huge deal. But as it was, like I was watching 50% of my profits going into our family freezer, and like I don't know, paying for all the vet bills and paying for all the food and everything else that they needed, um, and then just getting to sell one beef per year. Like I couldn't I wasn't adding it up, but I was like, this isn't profitable at all. How about I get out of this because I'm pretty sure I'm losing money on it. So I asked mom and dad if I could just get out of it, and they're like, no, you can't. What do you mean, no, I can't? You can't tell me what I can spend my money on. Well, turns out they could. So, um, yeah, I wasn't allowed to uninvest in the cattle. There was this stupid argument that my dad made that, I told him I thought I was losing money on it. He's like, "No, I'm pretty sure we're gaining money." And I'm like, "Well, okay, if you think we're gaining money, then how about you have all the money?" And he's like, "No, we can't afford to pay for all the expenses ourselves." And I'm like, "It's either you're losing money because of the expenses, or you're making money and you can afford the expenses because we're making money. Like, you can't have it both ways. But you know, there's no arguing with mom and dad, especially when they are very authoritarian. Like, they tell you what to do and you do it, and if you don't, then you get punished. So, you know, I stayed invested in cattle. I was losing money on it. But yeah, I was very confused by the time I was working my first job. Why on earth my parents were so pro freedom when it came to their political views, but they didn't want to afford me any of that freedom. I remember it was a day in June, and it must have been 2015 that I was. Our family was out picking rocks in our field. It's a thing you have to do on farms. You know, rocks can wreck farm equipment, so you have to go collect them all out of the field. And the whole time we were picking rocks, I was racking my brain for a way to solve this issue. Like, I wasn't happy. I didn't want to work the farm anymore, and I wasn't seeing a way to get out of it while I still lived there because of the way my parents were. So that evening, I made the very emotional decision to confront my parents, and I proposed moving out. I offered to do so on whatever terms they wanted to put forth. Um, but yeah, like, you have to understand, for me, being so isolated and having always lived here, it's like my family was kind of the only people in the world that mattered to me, and I knew they wouldn't like me moving out. But at the same time, like, I needed to pursue my own life goals and my own happiness. So it was that's why I say it was very emotional. Like, it was hard to bring myself to do this. Um, but like I said, I offered to do so on their terms. Um, my mom was very emotional also. Well, actually, they both were, my parents. They were, they didn't, I mean, they took it kind of how I expected. They got upset. They, not like angry upset, but like, why? Why would you want to leave us? Sort of upset. And they initially counter proposed a compromise. Uh, they didn't specify what the compromise was, but they just said, I'm sure we can work something out. You know, I think one suggestion that my dad threw out was, what if we uh, raised your rent, but we reduced your farm responsibilities? Because after college, I was paying rent. And I was like, okay, I could consider something like that. Sure, we'll talk it over at some point in the future. Well, at some point in the future, instead of compromising, they went the authoritarian route and basically started trying to beat me down with the whole, you know, authority argument. And they were trying to convince me that it would be wrong for me to move out against their wishes because, I'm the child, they're the parents. I'm a 24-year-old child at this point. Uh, but yeah, they were trying to convince me that it would be wrong for me to go against their wishes and move away. They hit me with the old, look at all the that we've done for you growing up. Like, we gave you life, we gave you, you know, your college education mostly. Like, we've done everything for you, and you owe us this in return to just live with us and help us work our farm and help us achieve our dreams. They wanted to move back to Idaho and start a business out there and stuff, and they wanted me to be around for that too. So starting at that point, and for the next 2 years, I would have these very long arguments with my parents. It was very unpleasant. We disagree on lots of issues, mostly religious, but also, like, just I was trying to ask them questions like, how can you say you have the authority to tell me where I live, and also like where I go to school and how I spend my money. What gives you the authority to do these things? And such questions were seen as violations of the fifth commandment to honor your father and mother. So they could punish me for them. They could basically punish me for asking questions. I couldn't talk to them face to face really. Like I would try, and that's what they wanted me to do. But my mom, uh, I would get 10 words out, and then my mom would go off on what she thought I said or thought I was going to say and talk for 10 minutes at a time. And during, or yeah, or more, like she could go for 30 minutes at a time. And during those 30 minutes, I would come up with, 8 more responses that I would want to say to various things that she said. But I would get 10 more words. Like, she would end with a question, and I would have to answer that question. And if I didn't get it in 10 words, then she would just go off on what she thought I was going to say for another 30 minutes. Like, I, I, I couldn't communicate that way. There was no respect for me. They didn't really want to hear what I had to say. All they really wanted was to beat me down and get me to shut up and work their farm for free. I started trying to write my thoughts and feelings out to them. I would write long emails, and I think half the time they didn't even read them. They were just like, "You can talk to us face to face. Anything you have to tell us, you can tell us face to face." It's like, "No, no, mom, I cannot talk to you face to face." But yeah, all of my questions were answered with assertions of authority and emotional manipulation. It got to the point where I was feeling like an outcast in my own house. My siblings didn't really understand what was going on because most of these conversations happened behind closed doors. But they did pick up on the fact that I was not happy with mom and dad, and they were not happy with me. And because of the way they'd been brainwashed, they were like, "Oh, Damien's in big trouble." So, like, I don't know. There was just like this air of Damien's sort of a troublemaker, and he's causing problems for the family, and so yeah, my siblings didn't really want to hear my side, didn't care. They weren't going to agree with me anyway, and my parents weren't listening. They were listening just enough to get some ammunition and then unload again. So I was feeling very lonely, somewhat depressed, and like I had literally no options at my fingertips. So then I made the decision to move out. I was extremely emotionally unstable. I wasn't sure I was doing the right thing. I was still Christian at this time. I was still mostly, uh, even though I was disagreeing with them on a lot of issues, I was still mostly in that brainwashed state by them. I was thinking very black and white, moral, right and wrong kind of way, and I was thinking, you know, I wasn't sure I was doing the right thing. I was trying to ask them if I was doing the right thing, and they were telling me no. Um, and I was trying to ask them on what grounds is it wrong, and they couldn't answer that. And so I was fairly convinced I was right, but I wasn't certain I was right, and that was eating at me. Yeah, I ended up moving out honestly just so I could have some space to think. Because when I was surrounded all day by people who disagreed with me or thought poorly of me, like I couldn't really even take refuge in my own thoughts, if that makes any sense. My mind was very full of some conflicting ideas, and I wasn't sure what to do, and I was so busy with work and work at the farm, and surrounded by people who were constantly beating me down that I couldn't even just have some time to myself to think. So yeah, the day I decided to move out, I made my move very quickly so that my emotions wouldn't get the better of me. I emailed my parents that day while I was at work, asking them to have my personal documents like social security card, car title, etc., ready for me. I packed most of my belongings that very night after I got home, and I just left. I just drove down the driveway, and by the time I got to the end of the driveway, I was like sobbing because literally everyone who mattered to me, I was leaving behind. They were all angry at me. None of them spoke to me. Like, I couldn't really tell what they were feeling. I knew it wasn't good though. It was by far the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. So I was very distraught. I could hardly see while I was driving. I was crying so hard. Like, I don't know. It's it was a very dark time. I was homeless. I didn't have a place lined up to go to, so I ended up staying in motels for almost 2 weeks while I was looking for an apartment. During those 2 weeks, my parents asked me to meet them at a Chinese buffet that was like halfway between where they were living and where I was working. I moved to I was staying in the town where I worked, which was about an hour away. So we met at a halfway point at a Chinese buffet, and they basically, it was a last ditch attempt by them to convince me to come back. Um, I declined. I was I wasn't ready. Like I didn't feel like I had had enough time to just sort through my feelings and thoughts on my own. So I declined. Um, it's funny, but on my way back from that meeting with them, I noticed that my brakes were feeling spongy, and by the time I got to my motel, I could barely stop the car. I got out in the dark with my flashlight and looked under there, realized my brake fluid was leaking, and I was legitimately worried that this was a sign from God that I was doing the wrong thing. Speaking of signs from God, I also passed my first kidney stone during those 2 weeks, and I was in such excruciating pain, and I was thinking of turning myself into a hospital, and then realized that I don't have an address to put down on any paperwork, so I decided to just muscle through it. Gotta love the American healthcare system. That's another thing that I thought might be a sign from God that I was doing the wrong thing. So it didn't take long for my parents to start finally emailing me because they couldn't talk to me face to face. They were begging me in these emails to see reason and return to their house. The little kids, when I say little kids, I'm the oldest of 10, and when I left, I was the oldest of 8. They've adopted 2 more since I've left. Um, but yeah, they were all the way down to 1 year old when I left, and I was 26. So my parents have committed themselves to a long time of parenting. But yeah, they sent an email where all the kids who were old enough to write uh, wrote a section of this email, and they were all begging me to come back, which is kind of a low blow because these kids, how am I supposed to explain to them the reasons I left? I can't I can't tell a 4-year-old who just misses his brother that I can't come back because mom and dad are authoritarian. Like what am I supposed to tell them? Their emails were full of these demands. They demanded answers about like why I left, where I went, etc. They were demanding respect, their version of respect in big old finger quotes. They demanded submission because they're my parents and they're an authority over me. So God commands me to submit to them. They were all full of accusations. I was accused of being demon possessed. I was accused of being spoiled, selfish, rebellious, prideful. Um, I would attempt to answer their questions. I would attempt to answer the accusations. It was all for nothing. They were they would literally just fish through my words looking for ammunition. Like, and that's how it went for a couple of years, really. Eventually, communication with them slowed down to the occasional happy birthday or Merry Christmas email. As I was learning more and more, I became more and more convinced that I had done the right thing in moving out, and I wasn't going to be going back. So Mother's Day 2018, I called my mom. It had been a while since I had actually had some communication with them. Things seemed to maybe have cooled down. I decided to try a phone conversation. So I called my mom for Mother's Day. Tears were shed. Everyone was happy. We were happy to hear from each other. This was the first time they'd heard my voice in, hmm, I was gonna say about a year, but yeah, okay. I'm apparently the timeline is messed up in my head. I thought there was a couple years of emails before this phone call, but no, it was only about a year. So there was, a lot of email exchange in that 1 year, I guess. But yeah, so I thought maybe things were gonna start improving in our relationship, and I could hopefully go back to being their son, maybe. So late 2018, I met Emily, who is now my wife, 58% health on the channel. I told her early on, like on our second date, about my family situation. I told my parents in a phone call uh, within a couple weeks of meeting her that I had met a girl I was interested in. And as a gesture of good faith, I gave them her contact info. And I told Emily, you might be hearing from my parents. I gave them your number. The first conversation my mom has with Emily, uh, she tried to warn her to break up with me. She told her that I was not trustworthy. I was the type of guy who was going to leave his family because I had left them and I wasn't good and she needed to get out of the relationship. I was really angry. Like, now Emily and I both remember this differently. She thinks that she dismissed what my mom told her right away. I seem to remember her being shaken and thinking that we would have to break up for like most of a day before I was like, look, you know me better than they do by now. They have hardly had a chance to talk to me in the last couple of years. Well, year, a little over a year. And, you know, you've been dating me for a couple weeks. Well, yeah, okay, maybe I don't know. The timeline is really messed up in my head apparently. But, I eventually convinced her, like, you know me better than they do at this point. Um, I convinced her to stay with me, which she did, obviously. So anyway, after that, communication with my parents went back to being rare and being hostile. After things cooled down again, about a year later, I decided to try inviting them to our wedding. Now, a little bit of context here. In one of the previous emails prior to this event, my mom said that I owed them apologies for things, and she left things unspecified. Um, so I, you know, trying my best to jump through the hoops they wanted me to jump through, I wrote out a bunch of apologies for various things that I thought I could have done better. I mean, I wasn't perfect in all of this. Actually, looking back, I don't think I really owed them apologies for half the things I apologized for. Um, but, I was trying to restore a relationship with them, so I apologized for a number of things. One of the things was not providing my address to them as soon as I had one. I hadn't done it because, frankly, at the time, like I said, I was very emotionally distraught. I didn't know if I could trust them. They kept throwing the scripture at me about stoning a rebellious son to death, and they definitely considered me a rebellious son. Yes, there is a verse in the Old Testament that says that if you have a rebellious son who won't obey you, then you take him to the elders of the city and everyone stones him to death. So, I didn't know what they might do. So, yeah, I didn't give them my address. Um, and I apologized. I told them why I hadn't. It was just because I didn't know if I could trust them not to come around uninvited. I didn't know if I could, and then I told them I wasn't really sure I could trust you because you kept throwing this scripture in my face. So that was the last email I had sent them. Like there was probably at least several weeks, if not months, of silence before I decided to call them and invite them to our wedding. In the phone call, I had barely gotten the invitation out of my mouth when they brought up the, "Are you sure you want us at your wedding? Because you literally thought we were going to kill you." And I protested back that that was an apology. Why are you throwing this in my face? I was apologizing for thinking that. You don't take something that somebody has apologized for and throw that in their face as an accusation. There was a bit more conversation after that. I don't remember. I was very upset at this point because I didn't. I wanted. I wanted my parents at my wedding. I wanted my family to be there, and it didn't look like that was going to happen. Um, but yeah, I remember. I remember saying something about like I. I was hoping that we could, reconcile our differences and have a relationship again. Not, you know, not this. Not what's going down right now in this phone call. And but I do remember my mom saying, "You're not even trying." And I said back that I am trying, but nothing I ever do is good enough for you. So, and then my dad hung up on me because I talked back. Like, because for me, like, I had been jumping through hoops, like I said. While I was living there, I tried to move out on their conditions, and they wouldn't give me any conditions. And since I left, they had nothing but hostility towards me, and I kept trying to jump through hoops. I answered all of their questions, I answered all of their accusations. I was trying my best to make them understand where I was coming from, and "you're not even trying" to me meant that they none of it counted. None of it was worth anything. They didn't. It was all for naught. So that really hurt. That was like probably the most hurtful thing anyone's ever said to me. But yeah, my dad hung up the phone because while I was saying nothing I ever do is good enough for you, the rage that was boiling up inside me caused my volume to increase just a slight bit during the course of that sentence. And so yeah, my dad just hung up the phone. And I cried. Emily was there when I called them, and I literally like threw my phone down and they just started crying on her shoulder. It was basically silence after that. I don't really communicate with my parents much. I was sending them some happy birthday and happy holiday emails um, after that. At some point, my brother reached out to me and said, "I think I can help us reconcile this situation. How about you?" Because my brother and I always communicated very well. Uh, we get each other. We were best friends growing up. I just turned on my treadmill with my foot. So my brother and I were best friends growing up. We always understood each other. He figured that the differences between me and my parents were mostly just miscommunications, and he thought that if he could understand where I was coming from and communicate that to mom and dad maybe better than I did, that he could fix this all. Um, it didn't take him very long to realize that wasn't possible, but I was still happy to talk to him. Like I told him about some of the stuff I had been learning about and like just how life was going, and he would tell me about their lives. During my communication with him, I ended up on struggling with questions of about my faith and ultimately deconverted. I am an atheist now. Um, I am still struggling with questions of social issues and human rights. I don't really know where I stand politically, but I think I might be turning into a socialist. Someone please change my mind. Anyway, I so I shared these things with my brother, uh, and we would because like I just wanted somebody to test my the new things I was starting to believe. My brother was always good for that. But yeah, right out of the blue, my brother sends me an email saying that he's moving out, and I was like, "Oh, really? Like, under what sort of circumstances are you moving out?" And it turns out he's been dating a girl uh, online, sort of. It's a long distance relationship. Um, But yeah, she came to visit, and my parents, he started seeing that I was right about them when they talk about, because I was telling him, like, when mom and dad talk about giving advice, what they really mean is giving commands. Like, I I dealt with their advice before, and it was you follow our advice or you're disrespecting us. So what's the difference? There's no effective difference between an advice and a command. And he started to see that because, like, he's trying to have he's trying to have a relationship with a girl, and they're putting their oar in, like, literally on every issue, and making the stupidest rules about how they contact each other, how often they contact each other. And based on the emails I'd sent him, he was starting to realize that I was actually right about a lot of things. So he moved out, um, and yeah, that's kind of caught up to where we are now, honestly. Like, I'm free, my brother's free, 8 more siblings to go. Apparently, they're not really even at the point, as far as either of us can tell, they're not even at the point of questioning anything mom and dad say yet. So anyway, um, yeah, that's kind of where we are. I have come a long, long way, it feels like. I feel like I'm not even the same person I was when I was in college. Like, I was extremely religious. I was extremely devoted to black and white moral thinking. Um, and yeah, I just thought the world revolved around me. And now I am an atheist and a feminist and possibly a socialist sympathizer at the very least. Like, these are all things that I never thought I would say just, what, 5 years ago? Heck, even like 3 years ago. So, yeah, it's been quite a journey. I find it very validating when I hear other people's stories that resonate with my own. One of the very first ones was, I think her name is Megan Phelps Roper. It's a young lady who escaped from the, uh, crap, what's that one Baptist church? The really offensive one that, like, protests at soldiers' funerals and stuff. Yeah, she escaped from that cult and gave a TED talk about, you know, her experiences, and it resonated so strongly with my own, that's how I ended up figuring out that my parents' religion really is a cult. It meets every definition. So, uh, but yeah, I find it validating to hear other people's experiences that sound like my own. So my hope with this video is that if there's somebody out there who is in a situation like mine, um, don't give up. There, you can you can escape, and there are other people out there like you, and I'm not going to judge you. I just want you to know there's other people out there who care about you, even if I don't know you. Anyway, if you watched to the very end, thank you for your time. This is probably going to be a longer video than I expected. I'm going to have to figure out how to edit this sort of thing. But yeah, just thank you for listening, and I wish you all the best. Bye for now.